This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expats Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia. Hey everyone, in this video we're going to answer the question why we don't live in Russia. Now Matt and I have been expats in Russia for a good probably 15 plus years between the two of us, and we have good things to say about Russia. And if you look at some of our other videos, you'll see that we have some not so good things to say about Russia, but overall we did enjoy our time very much. Matt, in this video we're gonna discuss why you moved away from Russia. Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. So I think, Marcus, you and I were talking before we started filming that there are certain types of countries that are good for certain periods in life. That isn't to say that Russia's only good for, when you're young, but there are a number of things that happened along the way while I was in Russia that made me come to the realization that maybe it makes sense to spend some time outside of Russia. I will preface all of this by saying that I bug my wife, who is Russian, almost daily that we should go back to Russia. And she tells me that I'm looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, as the saying goes. But in general, it almost felt like it was not out of my control, but I had progressed to a certain level in my career where the salary that I could get in Russia was very, very different than the salary that I could get in the US. I won't give exact numbers, but when I came back to the US, I started making literally 4 times more money than I did in Russia for the exact same job. I would even go so far as to say that for the most part, the job is even less grueling in the United States than it was in Russia. So that was a big, big driver. And at the same time, I had felt that when I was, trying to make the decision, do I want to leave Russia and go back to the US? I was thinking, I've gotten to this point in my career and I really want to get to the next step, and develop as a professional. Will Russia give me that experience? And I came to the conclusion that the answer is probably no. I kind of maximized my career potential in Russia for that given sort of step. I mentioned this in another video where I talked about how I got to a certain level, but all of my experience professionally was in Russia, and most Russian companies were looking at me as an expat, but they were like, but he only really has Russian experience. The expats who make a lot of money in Russia or have a great life are usually, senior directors but just senior management in general, and they're brought in to sort of give the international approach to how things are done. And I was not looked at that way by Russian employers. So the other side of the coin is if you have your own business, Russia becomes much more attractive. And Marcus, you'll get into that a bit. The other reason that we decided to come back was that having children, if you have a good job in the United States, is very, very cheap. Almost everything is covered by insurance. That is not the case in Russia. The level of service at hospitals when you're having children, going through the childbirth process, are very, very different. Yes, of course, you can do it for free, and the conditions are not good at all, even in Moscow. And if you want to pay for an upgrade, you're welcome to do that. But it can be $10,000 to have anything even remotely close to the same experience you would get in the US for a couple $100 with insurance. So that was, my wife and I were thinking about having children, and that was one of the considerations. But the main one was definitely career. That, why would you continue to work in a job that you didn't feel like you were advancing in when you could go somewhere else, learn more skills, and make 4 times as much money doing the same thing in a potentially less stressful environment. So that was my thought process. I hope to go back to Russia in the future. It would be amazing to go back as a more senior manager and teach people in Russia how, it was done in the US and share my experience. But that was kind of the thought process that led me to deciding to come back to the US. So I know you, Marcus, right. You had your own business, so you have a very different outlook. But I think some of the kind of thought processes are probably similar.
Yeah, actually, so I lived there from 2013 to 2019. And actually what you said, I've heard from several different people, several different expats, where they felt like they were, they couldn't grow as much as they wanted to in their given field. And even
I want to make one last little statement about that, actually, because I think it's important. When you start your career in Russia and you start working in all of your experiences in Russia, you can get trapped. I got to a point where all of my experiences looked upon very fondly when I came back to the US. If you have 10, 15 years of experience versus my 5, it's going to be looked at very, very differently. I've known people who have sort of gotten trapped professionally in Russia. Even though they're making quite good money by Russian standards, it would be impossible for them to make a jump back to their home country and keep the same standard of living. It would usually be a step down if they were to go home, which is not what I had. So just to make that clear.
I've run across a few they were students in Moscow, where they were looking into doing international law or finance or something like that, and they were hoping to stay in Russia after their studies if they were doing a master's degree or something. And they were specifically counseled not to do that because of this issue. So they were told, go back to the US, gain some experience, and then if you want to pursue that something internationally, then you can bring that Western experience back to Russia and be
Your
looked
salary
at
will
exactly.
be very different.
Yeah, so that's something that I've heard multiple times, and you kind of solidify that. So my experience was quite different. I went to Russia as an entrepreneur. I did some English teaching before, and then I wanted to do something in that space. So I started my own business, and it actually just happened that in 2014, so I was bringing over teachers to Russia and showing them how lucrative English teaching could be. And in 2014, the ruble went to over or halved in value, and so it went from being lucrative to maybe just being a Russian experience and interesting. And then at that point I thought, what can I export from Russia? I had taught English for a long time in a language school privately at a university in Moscow. I loved it, but when the ruble was 75 to the dollar, it was hard to kind of justify that as a career, like a long-term career option. Even if having a business in English teaching, you still are limited because you're basing all your prices in rubles. So I was thinking, well, what can I do to export something from Russia? Because now it's just super cheap. And so I thought, okay, maybe I know how to do the visa process. I've done it, I don't know, probably near 100 times at that point. And I figured I just started online and inviting people to Russia and showing them how to get the visa. And then we opened a location in Houston, and I was managing Let's Russia from Houston. And then in 2019, so we intended to stay in Russia. In 2019, we moved to Germany to open a second location. And then the reasoning behind that was basically, I have Let's Russia, it's growing. How can we expand fast and then have the option to go anywhere we want as a family? Because if we were making enough money, then we could stay in Germany, we could go to Russia, or we could go back to the US, and we could have all those options. That's the great thing about being an expat, is you have options, right? So, and then, we were doing fine until COVID happened, and we actually had our third child, and the healthcare, like you mentioned, is much better in Germany compared to Russia. So all of those factors came together, and that's why we're not currently in Russia. But at some time, we're not sure if we're going to live there for the long term, or if we will just visit often, because obviously my wife's Russian, we have relatives, and the kids love it there. They keep telling me that they miss their friends, and so there's definitely a plan to make it long-term part of our life. But we're not quite sure whether we'll move back there. Again, it just depends on all those factors. If Russia were flourishing, and COVID didn't happen, I'd probably be in Russia right now, or at the very least several times, throughout the year. So
yeah, I mean, I think we both kind of went through our stories. There are definitely reasons why we wouldn't live in Russia, but I think it's a bit funny that both of our circumstances kind of came together at more or less the same time. I have another couple friends who left Russia shortly after me. Another one is leaving now. He also has the same career concerns. So it's hard actually, because I didn't want to leave Russia. My best friends lived in Russia, right? Russians and also Americans who were in Russia at the time when I was there. They become great friends. What do you do? It's really tough. But at the end of the day, you also have to think about your personal circumstances, and sometimes being in one place is, maybe not the best for the future. But it's interesting you brought it up. You said expats have options, and I think that's the best part, right? If you go to Russia for, let's say, a year, right? You love it, you can stay. If you don't like it, you can leave. That's the best part about being an expat. It's just the pure flexibility and the options that you have at your disposal. And definitely grateful for that.
See you in the next video.